crumbling of trust in public institutions is a big part of it. That people they don't trust the government, they don't trust the media, and there are good and legitimate reasons not to trust the government, not to trust the media. There are lots of examples of people being harmed by, aspects and individuals within those institutions.
Okay, folks, welcome back to Monks and Punks. We have a very special guest today, my friend, my comrade, and one of my favorite new authors. She's the author of The Rise of a New Left, How Young Radicals Are Shaping the Future of American Politics. It's a really good read, and I recommend the book, and I recommend it inspire you to get more involved in changing the world. So, Raina Lipetz, thank you for being on Monks and Punks.
Thank you for having me.
So, first of all, I love the book. Congratulations on the book.
Thank you.
And it's been out for about a year and a couple of months?
Yeah. It came out end of September 2022.
Okay, great. And it's in hardcover now, and paperback is coming down the road, maybe?
I don't know what's going to happen with the paperback. Unfortunately, there have been a few internal shakeups at Verso, and I don't know who's doing what there, to be totally honest with you. I hope there will be a paperback at some point, but I'm not really sure the status.
Cool. Well, I just want to say thank you for writing the book because it inspired me. It's really a good overview of what's happening on the left these days. And I'm 53. I know you're a little significantly younger, but we both have seen a lot. And I think with the Bernie campaign, with the AOC campaign, with the rise of DSA, but also other movements. You've got movements in this book I've never heard about, like Sunrise and Justice Democrats. And so I felt it was a good overview. And so some of it was previous reporting and some of it was original reporting. Tell us how you came to write the book.
Sure. So I wrote the book really for two main reasons. The first one was that I felt like young people were not getting the credit that they deserved. Basically, I'd been reading a lot of reporting in mainstream publications, kind of to the effect that young people are lazy whiners. They just sort of tweet about things and they don't do anything. And I started to feel like that was just not true. And I wanted to kind of set the record straight on that. And the other piece of it was that I felt like the left was being misrepresented in all kinds of ways. One of them was this kind of young people don't do anything way. And the other way was that the left was being reduced to kind of toxic Bernie bros. That was a big, that narrative is a little out of date now, but that was a big thing in the years before I wrote the book. And that was just not what I was seeing. That wasn't my experience. Certainly in New York City, it wasn't my experience. I knew a lot of young women who were taking leadership roles. In fact, a lot of the organizations that I write about I think all of the major organizations I wrote about in the book were at the time that I was writing about them, being led by young women of color. So DSA was under Maria Svart's leadership. I believe she identifies as Latina or has talked about that in some interviews at least. And she is, I think, around my age. I think she's around 41, younger when she was running the organization when I was writing about it. So those were the two big drivers for me for writing about the book. And it's funny because it kind of changed in focus. When I first had the idea, it was going to be a lot more about Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez as a specifically focus on her.
Oh, right. Like a political biography.
Yeah, exactly. Right. But then, there are a few reasons that I shifted focus, and I'm glad that I did. I mean, one of them was that there were already, I think, 7 books in the works about her in particular. And so I decided it would be more interesting to write about the people who you kind of hadn't heard as much about, right? The figures who are not quite as prominent in media and the people who are kind of doing the work on the ground.
Right, exactly. There's a name. I was actually looking through the book to see if I could find it right before the interview. Right before the interview, but then I felt like no, I should just start the interview. But there's a name that's an important name of a young Latina who was like the campaign manager for AOC. What was her name?
Alex Rojas, I think, is who you're
Right.
thinking of.
Yes. So
Yeah.
tell us her story a little bit.
Well, she has a really interesting story, and she was running Justice Dems. I'm not sure what her title is these days, but she is still involved. As far as I know, she's still involved with Justice Democrats. She had a contract with CNN for a while, so she's somebody who actually broke through to these big cable news shows and was able to act as a voice for the left in that context, and I think be a really effective Bernie surrogate. She herself, dropped out of college to work full time on the Bernie campaign, and that there are a few different people in the book like that who essentially suspended their whole lives and really upended what they were doing and moved somewhere completely different to go all in on Bernie. That's not something you do if you're just a lazy social media commenter. And so that's one of the sort of proof points. I think that young people actually were doing a lot and doing the bulk of a lot of this work in that time. Alex Rojas had to leave school because she couldn't afford it, essentially. So her story represents the experience of a lot of people in this country, just not being able to do the things that they expected they would be able to do and had hoped to do.
But you did get the interview with AOC, and it's in the book.
I did, yeah. I actually got 2 interviews with AOC.
Like pre-election and then post-election?
Yes. But before, the second one was after she'd been elected, but before she'd been sworn into Congress.
A lot of people ask me, what do I think of how she's done? And I think she's done okay. What do you think?
I do. I think I'm of 2 minds about her. I think that I was certainly defending her for a long time. I know that there are people on the left who are disappointed in her. I think she's done a pretty tremendous job overall. I think she has moderated her tone, at least, if not her actual policy commitments. And there's a sort of mini debate on the left about that. How much has she backed away from her original kind of radicalism? I think, she's still one of the best that we have in that institution, in that body. I personally am a little skeptical of anybody who spends a lot of time defending Joe Biden right now. I think I understand the argument. I understand the terror of a Trump presidency. I think those are real things to pay attention to and real things to worry about. But I also think that Joe Biden is morally disqualified from leadership, and I don't. So it leaves you in a real bind, And I understand her choices around this, but it's a little disheartening the extent to which I think she's focused on presidential politics right now.
Yeah,
I just don't see that as an avenue for real hope or real change.
I'll give you a funny anecdote. I was just enjoying my favorite podcast, If Books Could Kill, and they had a story about a recent Biden press conference. He was asked, "Are you against the anti-Semitic protests at Columbia?" when you ask an octogenarian president that question and frame it that way, he was like, "Oh yeah,
right.
oh, yeah. I'm against it." Yeah,
Yeah,
kind
exactly.
of like when Biden was at the valedictorian speech of some pro-Palestine speaker, and got applause for making a point about justice in Gaza. And
Right.
Biden started applauding just because he was on automatic, he was on automatic pilot. So
exactly. And he himself has, as I'm sure, but he's participated in smearing these student protesters. And I think that's really kind of shocking and really to his discredit.
Yeah. I've defended Papa Joe regarding the Inflation Reduction Act and Build Back Better and
his labor. NLRB appointments, I think, have been a really really critical piece of what he's done. But
Yeah. And the first president to get on the picket line for the UAW, that was fantastic.
That was great.
But I don't know what it is about Israel in this country, but people seem to have a blind spot. I know you're half Catholic, half Jewish, right? So that's an interesting thing about your background. So maybe you straddle both worlds. I don't know, but tell us more about your background. You're from Rochester. You've got labor organizers in your family.
Buffalo.
Buffalo. Buffalo, right.
Very different. No, I mean, I'm kidding. I mean, I know a lot of people kind of think of Western New York. I mean, it's all part of this indistinguishable outside of the city. I'm not saying you do that, but I know in college, especially, everybody was like, what is Buffalo? Like 2 hours outside of the city? And it is not. It's about 9 hours.
Yeah, right. Well, I was part of the DSA delegation that went for India Walton to try to get her
yes. So you were
elected.
there in
I was
Buffalo.
there. I suffered.
Yeah. So, I grew up in Buffalo. My whole family's from Buffalo. They're all still there. Family of labor organizers, union officials, a lot of social workers and healthcare, people in healthcare. My brother is a special education teacher, works with young kids. So a lot of people in, I guess, what you would describe as the caring professions. And, Buffalo it's a labor town. It's a pro-union town. It's a Democratic stronghold, but they're on the more conservative side of the Democratic Party. The people who run the city, the mayor in particular, is a pretty reactionary guy.
Byron Brown, I remember
Byron Brown,
name.
yes.
Yeah, we beat him in the primary as DSA, Democratic Socialists, but then he created a rubber stamp. He literally created a rubber stamp, and he stamped himself back in. He couldn't get on the ballot, but he had his followers rubber stamp him back in as a write-in vote with a rubber stamp, and he won that way.
Right.
It's crazy.
That's right. Which is legal, which turns out to be perfectly legal under New York State election law. So that tells you a lot right there. I
don't want you to think he's just a rubber stamp politician, but
right. And that's the context. That's how I was raised. And like you said, my dad is a pretty non-observant Jewish American man. My mom is a Catholic Italian woman, and I try to take the best of both of those traditions.
Yeah,
I mean, I find inspiration in the best of both of those faith traditions. I'm very grateful that I wasn't raised to be kind of blindly supportive of Israel, and I wasn't raised with a particular connection to Israel. So I do have a different perspective in a lot of ways than many American Jews, and one that I'm grateful for.
Well, let's talk about that. It comes up a lot. My wife is Jewish and is anti-Zionist, pro-Gaza. We spend a lot of time. I just marched in Madrid, Spain, with the entire Spanish left of Madrid, and on the anniversary of the Nakba, using my Spanish and speaking about DSA and just different. Anyway, and I don't want to gloss over the fact that Joe Biden, despite his accomplishments, has really screwed up with he might lose Michigan because of this blind adherence to Israel. And so I don't know, and I tried on Monks and Punks, we try to make it personal and political. So what are your insights on how could the left contribute to a breakthrough experience regarding this kind of automatic thinking around Israel in our country?
Well, being prescriptive about the left, what the left could or should do, I try to avoid that because it's such a varied collection of people and interests, and there are kind of, I guess I would say, multiple lefts, right? That's something that kept coming up. I went to the socialism conference in Chicago. I believe the year I was there was 2022, and that was a really interesting place to be, especially in that year. There are a lot of great speakers, and one thing that came up over and over was that there are multiple lefts. There's the prison abolition left, there's the anti-war left, there's the left that is most concerned about Medicare for all. These are kind of different. There's overlap, obviously, but there's also a lot of difference in those constituencies and the people who get involved and what drew them to it. I would say that the young people who are leading these campus protests are already doing that work. And many of them are young Jewish Americans, and many of them are doing this in defiance of their upbringing. And it's a real act of courage. It's a real act of heroism, because they're not just defying the world order, and then the power structure in this country. They're also defying their friends and family, and really risking something on a personal level to be out there doing that work. And I've been really tremendously inspired by their leadership, and that I myself have had a smoother path, because I'm not alienating my grandparents. My grandparents are all dead. And also that when they were alive, they were not particularly blindly supportive of Israel. So I'm sort of risking nothing to say what I really think about this stuff. And a lot of people are risking a lot more. So I think it's happening. I think it's something that's in process, and I'm not really sure how to do a better job. I think we've done a pretty good job, and more people are starting to see through the lies that, I don't know what else to call them, that are being told about these protesters and about the protests themselves.
Yeah. It's a moral issue. And I think more people on the left need to embrace the fact that we've got basic common morality on our side, that you don't kill 34,000 civilians, and it's really hard to justify that. In fact, it's not justifiable. And I don't understand how somebody like Joe Biden and his people, his advisors, can think that the basic people are going to be okay with that.
Yeah, I mean, it really does show you how little we value certain kinds of lives, right? I mean, I just can't imagine this happening to any other group of people. And the administration, I mean, it's really appalling. It is. And I don't know, to reduce it to this issue. One thing I've been thinking a lot about lately is that every election cycle we hear that people on the left are immature, they're childish, they're putting their own sort of partisan issues above party unity, above the good of the country, et cetera, et cetera. We've heard this over and over about differences on Medicare for all, differences on climate strategy. And I rejected it then, right? I think that those are important and valid political differences and important issues and policies on which to base your vote. But I think even if you accepted that were true, and that you have to set some differences aside, this is not a difference that can be set aside, right? I mean, this is beyond the pale. This is not something that can be reduced to a trivial kind of issue, a trivial side issue that you should get over yourself and stop caring about. I mean, this is literally life and death. This is literally the deaths of I think 40,000, at least 40,000. We don't really know the full extent of the devastation. And that's it. That's a real thing. And there's no getting away from that. There's no reducing it to some kind of petty personal difference or immature attachment to purity or something like that. I mean, that's just patently ridiculous, and I think it's not working. I mean, they've decided that loyalty to Israel, Joe Biden's personal obsession with Israel, is worth potentially losing the election to Trump. And I think that's a morally disastrous calculus.
Well, speaking of Trump, I wasn't going to bring him up, but since you gave me the easy segue.
He's impossible. He's impossible to get away from.
Yeah, I mean, one thing people aren't talking about is, like, there was this big poll saying swing voters won't vote for him if he's convicted, but they will if he's not convicted. And now I haven't heard enough people say, well, he got super convicted, so now does that mean the swing voters won't vote for him? Is this going to mean that it's going to be easier for Biden to get reelected? Because right now the polls are Trump is ahead by like 1 point, so a marginal nominal difference. But what's your take on the recent 34 count conviction of DJT?
I think anything that's bad for Donald Trump is good for the rest of us, is good for the world.
Right.
So great. But in terms of the impact on the election, I really, really have no idea. I think it could not matter at all. I think it could help it. I mean, certainly in the short term, it's going to, I think, boost Trump's poll numbers with certain people. And it's definitely already boosting his fundraising numbers, right? He's is and will fundraise off of it. I don't know if it's going to hurt him overall. I think that it could turn a lot of people off, but it could also fuel enthusiasm in parts of his base. So, it's really anyone's guess. I mean, I hope it hurts him, and I hope it hurts his chances. But the prosecution itself, a lot of people have said this, but it's a little shocking to see the first conviction of a former U.S. president, and it's on the basis of this kind of petty financial crime rather than the murder of hundreds of thousands of people via his COVID policy, right? It's not about human life. It's not about the things that presidents actually do that are damaging, that destroy lives and families. It's about this thing that actually nobody really cares about, which is this payment to Stormy Daniels. I mean, I haven't heard a single person say that that's the worst thing that Trump ever did, right? But it's the thing that they could get him on.
Right.
So I don't know.
Maybe we could zoom back and look at the big picture together, as both of us are analysts of class and we're interested in creating a mass movement from below. And we probably get so frustrated when relatives or friends or former friends go MAGA and they want to have their little bit of radicalism, but it's not left radicalism. It's not grassroots, but it's a kind of a off the reservation kind of, it's highly speculative. It's based on illusions largely. And so I'm going to turn this into a question in a minute, but I'm going to give you something to chew on too, is I sometimes think that it's the MAGA could be blamed on the delegitimization of the mainstream political process, that and I don't want to go conspiracy theory on you, but things like the killing of the Kennedys may have created such a deep skepticism of the system that might have led to this openness to anything goes, a president who breaks all the rules. What's your take?
Yeah, I mean, I think the crumbling of trust in public institutions is a big part of it. That people don't trust the government, they don't trust the media, and there are good and legitimate reasons not to trust the government, not to trust the media. There are lots of examples of people being harmed by aspects and individuals within those institutions. At the same time, I think the Trump stuff comes out of grievance politics, which there's a psychological basis there. I think that's something that's kind of under examined on the left. Like, people they don't remember. There's that truism about people don't remember what you say, they remember how you made them feel. And people don't remember or pay attention or frankly care what Trump says. They like how he makes them feel. And how he makes them feel is he's a fighter, he's an outsider, he gets it, and he is sympathetic to people that the rest of us are looking down on. And I remember saying before the 2016 election, I said to a friend, the more that people make fun of Trump voters and disdain them and look down on them and mock them, the more they're going to be drawn to Trump. And I think it helps him to do that, to be kind of nasty to people about why they think the way they do. I had Trump voters in my family. I had a lot of cousins who were for Trump, and I did not successfully convince a single one of them not to vote. So maybe I'm not the right, person to talk to about this. But I think what I did do was I avoided personalizing it. Jane McAlevey, I heard this great interview, the wonderful labor organizer, educator, Jane McAlevey, was on Brian Lehrer recently. And she said something that's really stayed with me, which was somebody called up and said, how do I convince my fellow union members not to vote for Trump? A lot of them are enthusiastic about Trump. And Jane McAlevey said something to the effect of, you don't tell them anything. You don't tell or say, listen and engage, listen to what they are saying about why they're feeling that way and figure out a way to engage with them and sympathize with them. And that's how you persuade people. It's not, you don't persuade them by calling them stupid or insulting them, even when you really disagree with a lot of what they're saying. And even when you think their position is insulting to you, let's say. I mean, I think as a woman, this is a thing that I deal with a lot. It's people are casually sexist, they're casually racist, they're casually all kinds of things. And sometimes, there are people it's not worth engaging with at all, obviously. But I think most people, most of the time, are well-meaning, want to be treated with respect, want to be taken seriously. And that's what organizing is. It's not just kind of berating people or yelling at them until they adopt your point of view. And that's true. I mean, the left-wing version of that, especially in presidential politics, is, I can't believe you would even consider not voting for Biden. You're a monster. You're just as bad as Trump, which a lot of people are saying now. If you're not actively for Joe Biden, I've had friends say that to me. If you're not actively for Joe Biden, you're basically for Trump, and this is going to be your fault. And I just reject that completely. I think that's bad analysis, and I think it's bad politics, and I don't think it does what these people think it's going to do. It's never changed a single person's mind, as far as I can tell. So
yeah, you got to let people be guided by their inner light and their inner compass. And if Gaza, 40,000 or 34,000 civilian dead in Gaza is too much for you, you should be able to dissent at the voting booth. But back to your point about staying open to reaching out, that maybe some people are beyond the pale, but not most people, even MAGA voters. You could find a way to listen and engage. I like that about what you shared, because it really keeps the hope in there that we have basic intelligence. No matter who you are, there's basic intelligence, there's common sense.
That's
and that we're made to listen to each other, and we don't do it enough.
I think that's true.
Yeah. I wanted to also note that you are a great Facebook friend, and that you're fun and funny on Facebook, mostly because you have kind of a running repartee about your mom. So tell us how your mom is doing, and what's your mom up to lately, and what's something funny that she might have said recently?
Oh, well, the saddest thing about turning my mom into a public figure, besides the fact that she kind of hates it, she's been very generous and has said that I can do it, but it makes her uncomfortable. She hates to hear from friends of hers about, stories I told online. But the other sad thing is that I can't really say the funniest things that she says, because many of them are sort of, mean is wrong, but they're sharp-tongued, and they're about people that we know and are connected to. And so you can't make all of those things public all of the time. She can be very funny, especially about other people. But she's doing well. My parents are coming to New York in a couple of weeks, and I feel very blessed to have parents I love and also enjoy spending time with. It's not true in every family. A lot of people love their parents, but don't especially look forward to having dinner with them. So it's nice. There is a conflict between me and my mother right now, because she's very worried about the election. And I think, like a lot of people, especially people her age, it's just horrifying to her to think that Trump could possibly have power again, and I don't really know what to say to her about that, because I think it's a very possible outcome.
You could say people don't live forever, and he's getting up there, but maybe that's not the right thing to say to somebody
I
who's getting
have
up
said
there.
that. I've said, I mean, he's older than my parents are, and who knows? And he's in pretty poor health, but he had COVID, as well, remember.
Yeah,
So
remember that? Exactly. And everyone was like, fingers crossed. But that's terrible, terrible to
it is
wish
terrible.
death.
And,
It's
that's,
terrible that
one
we're
of,
wishing death on a sitting president at times.
it's terrible to wish death on anyone. And I have to say, I think that's one of the worst things about him is that he turned even very kind-hearted, nonviolent, anti-war, peaceful people like my family into the kind of people who wish death on their enemies because he's just so inescapable, right? He's so psychologically this horrible octopus who just gets in everyone's brains, and we can't. It feels very hard to escape him.
I like what you said, and it's worth repeating about people don't remember what you said, they remember how you made them feel. So if the left could maybe even steal a page out of Trump's book and remember that it's not about cerebral arguments, it's also politics are largely emotional.
Right,
And I know
right.
this from, the art of television advertising too. Like Leslie Stahl wrote a book called Reporting Live. And I was on 60 Minutes many moons ago and read her book afterwards. And I was like, oh, she's kind of a media critic, even though she's also a talking head on 60 Minutes. But she had this great point about they did a critical piece on Reagan, but the visuals were all positive. And so the Reagan people thanked them for it because the visuals were so positive. And she was like, what do you mean? Didn't you listen to our narrative? And they were like, who cares about your narrative? It was all about the visuals.
Right.
So,
And Bernie was very good at that, I think. I think that was one of Bernie's biggest is one of Bernie's biggest strengths is that he, and what he says is true and is important, but it's a pretty simple, the things that he says are pretty simple and repetitive, right? He talks to rich people have too much money and too much power over our politics. We should have health care, the very basic, simple messages. But what people remember is that here's a guy who seems like he actually cares what's happening to the mass of people in this country and what their daily struggles are. And that's what people did remember, I think, about going to Bernie rallies, listening to him speak.
Let's bring it back to the book before we wrap up. We're talking to Raina Lipetz, the author of The Rise of a New Left. I used to think it was the rise of a new left, but it's not. It's the rise of a new left. Without getting into the history of the new left per se, which was the late 60s, but
Right.
This is the rise of the new left. So before I let you go, let's just maybe come back to the book. Are you still in touch with activists and organizations that you reported on in the book, like Sunrise or Justice Democrats? And I know you're active in Democratic Socialists.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not specifically in touch with I mean, we're connected on email and all of that, but I have been tracking all of those organizations. Justice Dems has had some setbacks recently, but Sunrise seems like they're maybe gaining momentum again. And it's been interesting to sort of watch how these things have come in and out in the last few years. It's very changeable. I think everything that's happening in Gaza has been completely horrific, but and so it sounds weird to say, but it also has been a shot in the arm for the left and for progressive movements because there was a little bit of energy went out of it after Bernie. That was a tough loss, and I write about that in the book. What it does to movements and what it does to specific formations when you no longer have a charismatic leader at the top, and especially somebody who's getting as much media attention as Bernie was when he was running for president. There's really no substitute for that, and it is an organizational challenge. So what's happening and what's happened in the last few years has really kind of been a lot of dips and rises in the fortunes of the left. I'm somewhat hopeful about where we are now. I think there's been a lot more fight back than there would have been even 3 or 4 years ago. A lot more pro-Palestinian sentiment and activism than we've ever seen in the context of the United States. And people were angry, justifiably, about how the protesters were treated on campus. How, the police being called in, the attacks on the protesters, the violence that came not from the people protesting, but from the people counter-protesting and from the police. And those things have reinvigorated the left again, and there is a lot of pushback. We still don't have the kind of institutional power that we would need to make real progress on any of these issues. Right now, we're kind of in a defensive crouch, right? The main priority for a lot of people is to halt the carnage in the Middle East. And that's a defensive position. We haven't been able to do it because the powers that be are committed to continuing this genocide. But I think we're in a stronger position than we were at many other points in my lifetime, and I'm sure in yours also. I mean, we know we're both old enough that we lived through periods of real disempowerment and disillusionment, right? I mean, I don't think there was something that I would call like an institutional American left in the 90s. I guess sort of like Greenpeace. I mean, there
ISO, baby.
Yeah, I mean, right, but these were never. They didn't achieve majority. There was no. It was pretty fringe. And
when the ISO collapsed, I was just like aghast, because I was like, the ISO was like so big in the 90s to me, and I couldn't believe it collapsed a couple of years ago. So listen, I didn't give your official bio, but I know you've written for The Atlantic, The Nation, New Republic, Al Jazeera, America. What's next for you?
That's a good question. I just had a big story come out that I've been working on for a long time in the New Republic. That's a review essay of a book on Venezuela called Corporate Coup by Anya Parampil. So that's in the latest print edition of the New Republic that's on the stands now. I'm working on a bunch of different things. I'm writing a story for Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting that should come out any day now. And the other thing I did recently that was really interesting and kind of fun was I covered for the New Republic a conference held in Brooklyn called Dissident Dialogues. And my report on that, I think, would be of interest to a lot of people, because it was just this very weird event that took place in a huge warehouse in the Brooklyn Navy Yard. And Richard Dawkins was there, John McWhorter, Steven Pinker, a lot of names that are prominent, but sort of like were most prominent 10 years ago. So it was a very strange mix of people. And that was an interesting thing to be at. And I'm always working on something. I always have some
Steven Pinker. I was almost going to mention Steven Pinker earlier, because his take on the Columbia protests was abysmal. He said, should be all about open green space. People come to college for the open green space. And how dare that you have these people tenting. He used the Civil War term, tenting. It's like, what English are you in anyway? So,
no. Yeah, I agree. No, he made very little sense in anything that he said publicly in the last 5 years. But.
Right. So for those that don't know, Steven Pinker is the author of a book. I happen to have it here. It's called Better Angels of Our Nature. It's one of Bill Gates's favorite books, but it's kind of ahistorical and not very scientific. And I know that because I've read... because I've listened to the books, If Books Could Kill podcast. So there's my second shout out to my favorite podcast that I seek to emulate. And now I just need a witty co-host. So Raina, thank you so much for being on Monks and Punks. Is there anything that we didn't cover that you wanted to cover?
I guess I would just end by saying one thing that's really surprised me and pleasantly surprised me about the book and the reception to it is that I think like 7 or 8 different people have said, your book gave me so much hope. And I was really surprised to hear that because I wrote most of it in the worst part of the pandemic. I myself was not feeling very hopeful when I wrote it. So I'm very, very pleased to say that that's what comes through and that that's what people are taking away from it, because I do think that, hope is it's not a scientific category. It's not a thing you can kind of manufacture out of thin air, but it's something that we need in order to keep going, especially when something is a very long-term project, right? Like sort of saving humanity from itself and ending war. Those are big, big, big goals that are going to take a really long time to achieve. So I'm delighted to hear that people are reading it and coming away feeling hopeful. And I hope that that's my hope, is that people take some hope away from the book.
Absolutely. Those 7 or 8 people are totally right, and I'll be number 9 because this book gave me hope too. Because in the 90s we had the ISO, this Trotskyite Marxist debating society that they did a lot inside labor, but they weren't running candidates. And now you and I are members and working members, active members of the Democratic Socialists of America, and we're running candidates and we're winning elections. I could talk about Marcela. You worked on Marcela's election, so did I. Alexa Aviles, Julia Salazar, AOC. And so I think it's great when you have an organization that's actually getting stuff done. And your book, Rise of a New Left, The Rise of a New Left, I highly recommend people get it because it talks about the activist groups that are actually getting stuff done and winning victories for the people. So Raina, thank you so much for being on the show. And I'll see you out there on the streets at the next canvas or the next meeting.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
Bye.
Bye.